All right. So, good morning, and good afternoon. I am hosting a Sutra brother. His name is Carlos Cantu, and he's from Mexico. He considers himself an amateur Buddhist historian, and I prefer to introduce him as a student of visual arts, and he also works in graphic design. So, Carlos, we were having some overlaying interests, perhaps about the vortex that I believe it's called, right? Where we see these epithets of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas, generally speaking, as kind of warriors, so to say, which kind of go um, unconventional to what we usually understand bodhisattvas to be, right? These kind of archetypes of peacefulness and joyfulness and non-violence and everything else. So I was wondering if you could give us an introduction to the sutra, and then what's your kind of position on it?
Right. So, for those who are maybe not aware, uh, there's a Mahayana Sutra. It is called the Ārya-bodhisattva-gocara Sutra. It has shorter names like just Bodhisattva-gocara. It has larger names like Arya, Bodhisattva, Satyavadin, blah, 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 blah. But the general topic of this sutra, it's a conversation between a bodhisattva that will later be revealed by Buddha Shakyamuni himself that he was a high attained bodhisattva and a king. And actually, this conversation talks about the topic of war, or more specifically, a just war, or what we usually know as a just war theory. So, when is war really justified? When you can say, okay, I'm going to go to war as a Buddhist country or as a Buddhist army because it's implied that this king is a Buddhist. Uh, and what will happen, because we all know killing, it's obviously one of the worst things we can do as as Buddhist practitioners. It brings heavy amounts of negative karma, and it deplenishes merit and all of that. So that's basically the main topic, or the primary focus of this sutra. A talks between a bodhisattva and a king, and the just war theory from a Buddhist perspective, Mahayana Buddhist perspective.
Hmm. So you're saying kind of it lays out the political conditions under which a Dharma king would be justified to declare war or something like that.
Yeah, indeed. And this is from a more big collective perspective, because there's a sutra, I know at least one sutra that talks about this kind of topic in a more individual level. It's the Upaya Kausalaya Sutra, or the Skill in Means Sutra. But this is about, you know, a great scale war between two kingdoms, between two countries, between two big armies.
Hmm. And when is this sutra usually dated around?
Mm, it's usually dated between first BCE and third BCE, or I've seen alternatively dated from third BCE to 5 BCE. So I
Oh,
will say it's at least, I don't know. I would say there's at least from the first BCE to the 5 BCE, but there's no accurate dating for this.
yeah, good. So this means this is actually before Nagarjuna, more or less.
Could be, yeah, more or less.
Yeah, because usually when people think about these relationships of Dharma kings and politics and kind of Mahayana principles and whatever else, right? There's Nagarjuna's Ratnavali also, where where we kind of see some chapters discussing the role of the king, kind of Nagarjuna giving instructions directly to kings, and then later on in kind of Himalayan history, right, with King Tritsondretsen and the Samye debates, and also with Genghis Khan and the Mongolian Empire and its relationship with Tibet and China and everything else. So we kind of see there a materialization of perhaps perhaps these kind of political conditions that you're talking about. Although think about it, in the Ratnavali, Nagarjuna himself doesn't really tell us anything much about sort of conditions in which violence is justifiably used, right? He kind of just tells the typical stories of what an archetype of a Dharma king looks like, but there's nothing really much about these sorts of just war theory. And if the sutra is so old, I think this is actually even before the Western conception of just war theory, right? So how do you think these kind of play out? Why do you think the sutra is not as popular or not as easily heard about?
Well, first of all, in my research, I have found that apparently this sutra is part or it is found in the Tibetan canon, but not really in other Buddhist schools, like, for example, East Asian Mahayana. I'm not aware that this sutra was ever present in East Asian Mahayana, for example. And that's kind of interesting because it's a very old sutra, and also, well, with nations like Japan being extremely imperialistic and warlike in its conception, and being Buddhist nations, or at least half Buddhist nations, or even China, imperial China, it will be like, I think it will be the normal course of things to kings and emperors and rulers using, not maybe not this specific scripture, but some scripture like this to justify these things, but we don't really see that. So I can't really pinpoint a cause for this sutra to be this obscure, because this is a very obscure scripture. There's only one English translation that I'm aware of, and it's very, very expensive to get it. So I actually don't have the whole sutra because I will need to pay like maybe $1,000, I think. It was in Amazon, like $1,000, and that was just extremely expensive for me to buy. But I found little fragments of it in the web.
Okay. Are you talking about the Paul Hackett translation and the Lodzang Jaspa translation?
Yeah, I think because it's the only one available. But let me check.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only one that I found also. I haven't read the sutra either. But the way but that's kind of the perhaps one of the advantages of looking at religious texts is because we can find research about them outside of what the content of the text is actually saying sometimes. But based on what you're saying, it sounds like a Chinese mandate of heaven, right? It just sounds like a ticket for a ruling family to claim some sort of power over whatever. Would you say that the sutra kind of played a similar role in terms of Buddhist social stratification and everything else?
Could definitely be interpreted that way. Also, this is not as war encouraging as one may think from the short analysis, because it talks to a long extent about what conditions you need to fulfill to actually have a just and justified war. And it's quite a lot of conditions. It says, oh, you need to actually talk with the other country or the other kingdom. You need to apply diplomacy in basically every aspect you can, and just if they deny all attempts to diplomacy, all attempts to to a fair, you know, I don't know, maybe a treaty uh, that's beneficial for both nations, both kingdoms, then you can have a justified war and only for the protection of your people. You know, it's not like go and exterminate everyone and something like that. It's not like the Bhagavad Gita, for example.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good comparison. Sure. But this kind of sounds like okay. Here's a quick thought. Do you think this has something to do with the four activities, the pacifying, increasing, uh, kind of control-ish, and then the wrathful activities? Because it sounds like the sequences of of the four activities are kind of similar to what these criteria for just war theory are. It's like first we try to pacify, we try to kind of reduce any sort of aggression. If that works, or if it doesn't work, we try to uh, kind of maximize favorable conditions and minimize disfavorable conditions. And if nothing works, well, we'll have to figure out something less preferable.
Yeah, of course, this actually could be like an early foundation uh, of the four activities, but represented in a more worldly way, if you want.
Uh-huh. But well, what does this worldly way assume, right? Is like let's think about most Buddhist kind of civilizations that had some sort of military prowess, be it Ashokas or Genghis Khans, or if you want to consider post Ming China or the shogunates in Japan or whatever else. It's like these sorts of nations didn't really, how to say, they didn't only rule over Buddhist practitioners, right? It's like in India, obviously the religious diversity that it has, and in Tibet there's also the bone shamans, and then Mongolia proper there's the Tengri shamans, and China with their Taoists and Confucianists, and the Japanese with their Shintos. So there's always some other sort of religious minority in the kingdom. It's not as easily discernible as, for example, European states where most Christian civilizations were exclusively Christian in that sense, at least pre-medievally speaking, more or less. So does the sutra only talk about kind of dharmic vows, like Buddha dharmic vows um, for Dharma kings, or does it have something to do with how to sort of build a civilization with non-Buddhist followers in it also?
As far as I'm aware, this talks exclusively about a Dharma king and implies a Dharma nation, Dharma country, Dharma kingdom, you know, where all subjects are Buddhist of some kind.
Yeah.
So obviously, in some nations, for example, uh, Japan, Japan was a Buddhist nation because the elites adopted Buddhism, but actually the common people, they some of them adopted Buddhism or Buddhist practices, but most of them were actually Shintoists, you know, their native religion. So it's kind of normal to see that this scripture wasn't used as a justification, you know, because if you are not a Buddhist, then why would you care about what Buddhism has to say about just war or unjust war, you know? And just like you said, this happened with China. We don't actually, as far as I know, we don't actually find this scripture in the Chinese canon, um, or other countries like that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know. It sounds uh, diplomatically viable to see what's in the strategic toolbox of the other country, right? It's like even if you don't subscribe to the same kind of policies, it's sounds reasonable to know what the intentions and perspectives of the other country is. Wouldn't you say it would have been kind of advantageous for, I don't know, states north to India or Southeast Asian countries or whatever else before the solidification of Buddha Dharma there? Wouldn't you say it would be beneficial for them to have known about these things, just to, yeah,
Yeah, of
just to,
course, because actually, when you start to analyze, this is pretty solid advice, you know, from the perspective of a king, not only a Buddhist king, but from the perspective of a king, period, from a ruler, an emperor. This is pretty solid advice because war, uh, I will leave aside the moral and ethic implications of war for a moment. War in itself, it's usually a waste of resources, you know, a waste of human resources, a waste of material resources. It sometimes sets back the culture of a nation for quite a lot of time, you know. So trying to get a good a deal with a rivaling kingdom or a rival country, it's the logical thing to do from a purely worldly secular perspective, you know. Of course, humans are not logical all the time, so they do weird things like go to war without any without any justification at all, you know. But yeah, it will. I think personally that if this scripture was more uh, maybe present in ancient times and in modern times, of course, too, it will be beneficial for nations.
but has the sutra ever been applied as far as the history of any Buddhist country?
Sadly, not that I know. You know, there's not a single like instance in what I can say. You know, a king or an emperor read this sutra and said, you know, I'm going to to follow what it's actually written here. At least not that I know.
No, no, you're right, because I mean, think about it. Even the kind of the classical Mongolian rulership. I mean, they when they mention kind of the Buddhist scriptures that they defer to or the teachers, I mean, there's not much mention of the sutra at all. I mean, there's mention of some highest yoga tantra practices or some specific teachers, but there's nothing really about uh, any sort of sutra grounding of any sorts of things. But do you think that the sutra didn't gain much popularity because of the typical conflicts? I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at this, I think, right? Because to some extent, you can say that, oh, well, the Tibetan canon preserved it just because they wanted to have all the text in the canon that existed in India, so they basically just translated everything and whatever else. But you know, there's other readings that would say, well, look, it's more about, there are things in Dharma history that people don't talk about or they're not particularly comfortable about talking, and there's all these sorts of criticisms of Buddhist modernism, right? The post 19th century, 20th century Buddhism, where it turns out to be some vanilla Disneyland kind of wishy-washy version of Mahayana and Vajrayana, and it doesn't explain consistently a lot of nuances in Sutra and Tantra. So what's your take on this?
Uh, I don't think uh, Tibetans were like seeing this scripture as taboo because you know we know that Tibetan lamas actually cast spells and whatnot to repel armies, enemy armies, and all that stuff. And Tibetans were not a 100% pacifist country. They had wars. They fought with other nations. Um, so I don't think they had the topic of Buddhist violence as a taboo, but Right now, and especially in the West, it is a taboo to talk about these sort of things, because nobody wants to accept that violence is present in Buddhism. Usually, when you hear about Buddhist violence, everyone says like, "Oh no, it's because they are not true Buddhists." It's because uh, uh, they are interpreting the scriptures the wrong way. All sorts of justifications. But Buddhist practitioners are people, and people live in samsara. In samsara, there's wars, there's violence, and you can't just expect everyone to just die. Buddhism as a religion, as a tradition, will have died many, many, many thousands of years ago if that was the case.
Yeah. Based on your explanation, it sounds like the typical defense of communism. Oh, that wasn't real communism, guys. It was
Yeah,
like,
but it's that wasn't real Buddhism.
yeah. That's not real Buddhism, guys. Real communism or whatever. People didn't understand, right? Hmm. But okay, do you do you think that even today, if we actually had uh, a Mahayana kind of centric government, which we don't, right? Because all Mahayana countries are not active practitioners. Look at China and Japan and whatever else, right? It's like the what really was in peak, classical Indian age or early medieval Asian history, those kind of unions of dharma and politics and whatever else. We don't see them anymore, and we haven't seen them for a few centuries. But what do you think it would look like given today's kind of political climates and globalization and the Buddhist vanilla modernism that we have today and whatever else? How do you think these would kind of get along?
Oh man, it will be crazy.
Uh,
It will be totally crazy because Buddhism is not the Buddhism is not a pushover religion. That's the expectation that most Westerners have about the tradition, but it's really not. So it will be controversial for a Mahayana prime minister or Mahayana president, to suddenly decide to participate in a violent conflict. Maybe not a full scale war, but even uh, national violent conflicts. Or the press will the press will eat this hypothetical ruler. It will be a total shit show.
yeah.
And it's not really that different from currently Theravada countries, because Theravada countries are actually enforced. Theravada Buddhism is enforced in the countries. The rulers are actually practitioners. Most of the people are practitioners, and we see this. I mean, there's controversy about the conflicts, violent conflicts between Buddhists and Muslims in Burma, in Thailand, I think. So this is not just an hypothetical scenario. It's happening. Maybe not with Mahayana, but it's happening within Buddhism as a whole.
Hmm. Hmm. What do you think about the current protests in Thailand with the monarchy and democracy and whatever else?
Oh man, I really don't know what to say. Uh, I don't know if you're aware, but the king in Bhutan actually advocated. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, there's no king in Bhutan anymore. I don't know if this took off yet or it will be the next year or something like that. But we are experiencing weird times within the sphere of dharmic rulers, if you will. And it's a very complicated situation in Thailand with the monarchy, because I'm not going to pretend to be an expert of modern Thailand politics. I'm not. Uh, but I'm not even sure that this is, how to say it. I don't even know why they are doing this. It's because they don't want a king, period. They don't want a monarchy, period. Or is it because it's a bad monarchy? I can tell because I'm not pretty aware of the current scenario.
Yeah, I mean, to also my very limited understanding as a non-specialist in Southeast Asian politics, it seems that it's more of a combination of the first two problems, that they just want a systemic change towards democracy. But that aside, tell me about Bhutan. I did not hear about this before. So why is the monarch abdicating?
Mm, I think because he felt like it. uh, oh, but the people are very, very sad. They don't want the king to advocate the throne. Uh,
Yeah, that's my intuition also. I mean, Bhutan was never colonized by anyone. It seems that the monarch enjoyed a decent amount of popularity most of the time. So I don't see much of a reason for the monarch to be like, okay, well, not anymore. You, is there something more specific that's happening there now, or do you just want to move on to something else?
Yeah, but because as far as I know, there's no like any specific reason that the king has given to this historical event. Uh, I think he mentioned that he wants a more democratic country. I know they have a parliament. I mean, it's not like the king is the supreme authority of Bhutan and he can do whatever he wants. So I guess it's something I really don't understand. I don't understand his decision.
Oh, maybe it may be something. I mean, it's not in the news or anything, but it seems. I mean, it reminds me of when His Holiness decided to give more power to the Sikyong and whatever else. It's not like there was some sort of movement inside Tibet for His Holiness to not be politically active. I mean that people quite liked his activities, political activities, so to say, and I think it was more of a personal decision to move the Tibetan refugees towards a government in exile that's more democratically leaning and whatever else. Um, so do you think it's kind of maybe a similar process where they're just deciding to kind of modernize the political structure and look towards uh, having continuous.
Uh, Maybe it could be. It could be. Uh, but uh, I mean, I can't really say a lot because, I mean, people support this king extremely. They love him. It's not a bad ruler at all. Uh, so it's overall a weird decision from my point of view. Maybe he is experiencing political turmoil inside his court and the parliament. I can say I'm not a Bhutanese politician.
Sure, sure, sure. Maybe let's trace it back to the more scriptural grounding. The one thing that kind of keeps lurking in my mind, at least, is this whole notion of the perfection of the paramitas, right? Because this definitely sounds like a Mahayana sutra, right? It has the notion of bodhisattva in it and everything else. So it's likely Mahayana byproduct. Um, usually the fundamental pillar of Mahayana is the perfection of the six paramitas and everything else, and that kind of has to do with ethical conduct and whatever else. So, what do you think about these sorts of dynamics between maintaining vows of nonviolence and whatever else, and conditions to kind of not necessarily break the rules, but find alternative solutions or whatever you want to call them? Or do you think it's actually like breaking a Pratimoksha or a Mahayana vow if a Dharma king goes to war or something along those lines? Like how do you see these nuances between Bodhisattva promises and these kind of mundane protecting the land and the people and whatever else?
Well, this is in my more personal views, but it is based of scripture and what great masters have said. For example, His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, has said that. mm, Let me remember the quote. It was something like, while if a violent act is like done in for sake of compassion, it may seem as violence exteriorly, but it is essentially not violence. So this isn't something that he invented. Uh, it has, even going back to the Pali Canon and the suttas. Uh, Lord Shakyamuni said one time that you will create horrible negative karma if you go to war with mind thinking, oh, I hate my enemy and I want him dead, I want him suffer, I want all these bad things, but it's rather implied that if you go to war without a negative kind of mindset, then these negative uh, connotations of the results of violence and war may not be as severe or as bad. So there are certainly, even going back to the Pali scriptures, some canonical foundation for this kind of thinking. It's not just about the act itself, but it's about the mentality, the state of mind, and the actual intention that you have at the moment. So if a king doesn't want to go to war because he hates the enemy kingdom and he wants to exterminate it, but he does it because he loves his people, he loves the Dharma, he doesn't want it to disappear, he doesn't want his own people to suffer, and he tries to make the casualties as low as possible, things like that. Then I really think it is according to general Buddhist precepts and to Mahayana more specifically, and Mahayana teachings. It is according to them.
Yeah, sure. But how satisfying do you think this answer is? I mean, I'm telling you this not because I necessarily agree with the argument, but it's something that, as enthusiasts or active practitioners or however you want to look at it of Mahayana, we have to have some sort of uh, reasonably good response to this. I mean, if you know Zizek, for example, Zizek kind of, criticizes Mahayana practices. I think one time he gave this example of the Japanese monks in the 1930s and 40s, where, some of them would commit kamikaze because of they had this delusion that they themselves don't exist and the sentient beings harmed don't exist, so therefore ultimately speaking there is no harm, and that kind of gave them uh, you know the view that it's okay to engage in sort of violent conduct, so to speak, right? So sometimes I think in some commentaries of the ninth chapter of Shantideva, there's also uh, these sorts of discussions of, well, if everything's appearances, or if so much of Madhyamaka is about appearances, then where is the harm, kind of thing, right? So, uh, and I think at least in the Shantideva commentary, I think it says something along the lines of, yeah, but the experience of pain still feels real. So that itself is enough of a condition to say that's harmful, which means it's bad. So it still falls under the kind of Mahayana precepts of reducing and eventually completely uh, abandoning harmful conduct. But easier said than done, right? As you know, kind of Zizek is also criticizing about these sorts of the Japanese monks in the 30s and 40s. Like, what do you really think is the correct response here from the Mahayana side?
Well, I obviously I side with Shantideva in this regard, because
Yeah.
saying just I don't exist, he doesn't exist, we are all, like we are empty, and the act of violence is empty in itself. I don't think that's a real justification. It was more like a misconception that happened mostly on Japan, but the Japanese folks have crazy, crazy things going on with their Buddhism historically, as late as the 1940s. But the thing is, I don't really think the negative consequences of the acts are completely eradicated, because even if you die a violent death with a correct mindset, you don't really have you don't really have the knowledge that the other person died just like you. Like, you may have the correct mindset, you may have this correct state of mind, but the other person he may die horrified of the actions and the context of what was happening. So if this specific sutra or other sutras that talk about this, or maybe a more you know metaphysical justification, like in some commentaries, I don't think ultimately everything it's harmless, but it does reduce the amount of negative karma and the replenish of merit that you will experience.
Mm.
Like in this sutra, there's a small fragment that says something like, although in war injury and death may be inflicted on the opposing army, a ruler by his skillful means will commit less unspeakable and less non-virtuous actions, and may not necessarily experience retribution, since he undertook such measures with heedfulness and compassion. And again, it's not the only sutra that talks about this. The skill in means sutra, and we we really find these words, a skill in means, a skillful means. It talks about compassionate killing. So it's nothing unique to this sutra.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. But on the other hand, you have the typical kind of, in the Buddha biography, there's the Angulimala Sutra. I believe that's what it's called, right? So there's. Are you familiar with the?
I'm afraid I'm not.
Okay, so if I remember correctly, I think the Angulimala Sutra is yeah. I mean, I hope I'm providing a sufficiently accurate description, but it's something along the lines of, yeah, well, there is this guy that was obsessed with killing, and then he made himself like a necklace of the fingers of the
Oh
people.
yeah, the serial killer that his guru told him to make a
Yeah,
finger necklace, and he tried to kill the Buddha and all that stuff. Yeah, yeah, I know that. I know about that one.
yeah, right. So then there's typical kind of narratives about yeah, these sorts of how to say, now non-violence and whatever else. But I think the more difficult question is, because I like the way you were connecting it to maybe consequences or outcomes. I mean, I'm not entirely kind of persuaded by the translation of prasanga as consequence. I mean, I'm not a Sanskritist, but anyway, that's another debate. But anyhow, let's just call them outcome for the sake of this discussion, or effects or something. But how to say, this kind of linkage, right, is because there's always the kind of relationship to the karmic seeds that you're implanting, right? Because every action eventually is a karmic manifestation, and the chances of its reoccurrence or whatever else, or the conditions of ripening and so forth. So, but what I'm having difficulties with is at least contextualizing this in the more metaphysical sense, as you said, because, for example, right, I for one never understood this discussion of retribution, of dharmic retribution or restoration or whatever you want to call it in Buddha Dharma, right? Because I think of, for example, the Ushnisha Vijaya Dharani, or I think in Tibetan is the Namgyalma, the Namgyalma Sutra, right? Because it talks, it talks about sentient beings that are afraid of karmic retribution, and then they go to Namgyalma, and then they receive some Dharani, and then the retribution is quicker, or it's just instantly purified, or whatever else. I mean, sometimes in some medicine Buddha scriptures, I think also in the medicine Buddha Sutra, there's all these sorts of things, right, about even if there is a problem or a downfall or some sort of negative imprint, then with correct devotion and generation of bodhicitta and everything else, then it can be sort of instantaneously purified, or what have you. So how do you think it's a good way to contextualize these notions of retribution and restoration, the classical, at least, Western debate of retribution and restoration? How do you think it fits into kind of Dharma philosophy?
Well, it's complicated, because here in the West, we don't really have the concept of retribution as understood by a more dharmic approach. We have what it is now as sin, but retribution or bad karma, it's not sin. It's really not the same. Also, it can be compared. It's not really the same. But yeah, like in the postrations to the 35 Buddhas, there's this part that says, "Oh, no, by the power of the 35 Buddhas, all your negative karmic imprints are purified," and all that. And of course, when you do Vajrasattva practice, Vajrasattva is basically the CEO of purifying all your negative karmic imprints and whatnot. So I think, for example, this sutra says there will be not at all. There will be not negative retributions if a ruler or a king keeps his word in line with what is said in this sutra. I'm not really sure about that. Personally, I don't think it can be possible, because we are humans. We can maintain a pure state of mind every minute, every second of our day, and in a war, even less. There will be a moment that you don't want just to defend your country or to protect your people or the Dharma. Want it or not, there will be a moment where you will say that, like when you're playing Call of Duty, I want to kill that fucker, because some things like that. So I don't really think every single negative imprint or retribution, it's automatically purified just because you kept in line with the sutra. But the notion of retribution in itself, it is it's complicated, you know, from a Western perspective. I guess it is from a more dharmic perspective, because we have commentaries talking very extensively about this and about that, and then you have all the stuff that, you know, you don't only have the negative karmic imprints of this life, but of millions and trillions and bajillions of past lives, and it all becomes very difficult to understand.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm completely with you. If if you remember from my other talk with Simon, I tried to bring up this very same topic about, okay, so we have experienced bajillions and countless lives, and there's countless sentient beings, and every sentient being has some sort of ontologically isolated mind stream. And in this precious human rebirth, we are supposed to purify countless lives of karmic imprints that we don't even know, right? We don't have clear omniscience. Chances are we're not even close to omniscience or whatever else. So we don't even know essentially, um, to some extent, what are the imprints that we're supposed to purify. And I think that puts a very difficult burden on Mahayana practitioners. And because it's very hard to practice something without having the epistemic access into knowing what you're doing, right? And then it just makes it complicated, because on one hand, Buddha Dharma is the tradition that says, oh no, you can question everything. You know, there's all these encouragements of skepticism, but doubt is also a klesha, or doubt is also a fetter, I believe, in the Pali Canon. And even in Tendai schools, doubt has, you know, a negative connotation to some extent. So there's these kinds of nuances of the benefits and the difficulties that doubt can bring to the practice. But then there's also this kind of, um, how to say this, encouragement to think about countless sentient beings and countless lives that your particular mind stream has been through, and then say, okay, without you even knowing what's going on, you have to practice and you have to purify and go to the CEO of Vajrasattva or whatever else, right? So how do you make sense of these things, philosophically, or in your practice or whatever else?
Oh, personally, I don't.
Yeah.
Like, personally, like, you know, they say, for example, in Sokshen, liberates you in one life. You know, Tantrayana in 16 lives, Sutrayana in some hundred lives, blah blah blah. So Sokshen in this life. So, does that mean if I found suction in this life, the, does that mean this is my last one or what? So I only need to purify my defilements of these lives, or I need to purify the defilements of the past lives. How do I know? and and these sort of things, you know, and you became uh, very confused in a metaphysical sense to what to do, what to practice, this or that, blah blah blah. So I try to keep uh, I try to keep my what ifs to the lowest minimum, and just practice, because, well, I can't really do much about it, you know. Like you said, I'm not near omniscience to even know how many Vajrasattva mantras I need to chant. You know, it's not like, oh, do 1,000 or 10,000 Vajrasattva mantras and you are good for this life. It doesn't work like that. Well, at least not for me.
No, that's reasonable. Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about this, let alone Dzogchen, but I know that there's some tantras that say that the fruit of this particular practice only ripens in the bardo, and there's other tantras that say no, in this very body that you have right now, you can generate the rupakaya and manifest. whatever luminous clarity, blah blah, into this very embodied stream, or the other way around. So who knows, right? So but that's the difficulty, because it doesn't look at it the other way. Uh, there's so many enlightened masters, so to speak, in every Mahayana tradition, right? From the Himalayan side all the way to the East Asia. Every school says that such and such teacher has achieved uh, parinirvana, right? Either be it the strict progressive schools or the instantaneous enlightenment schools or what have you, right? But there's always a lineage that recognizes a particular figure or collection of figures as enlightened. So what's really that process like there? How do they kind of know what are the conditions or whatever else? At least the inner conditions, right? Because the Pali Canon is quite uh, how to say elaborated about the marks of the Buddha, right? There's the major and the minor marks of the Buddha and whatever else. I guess people can look for those more or less on the outside, but I'm sure that Dharma emphasizes a lot about inner qualities. So how do you think people come to these sorts of conclusions of which teacher is enlightened or whatever else?
Oh well, in the Himalayan traditions, I think we got very easy for this topic. Uh, did the guy achieve rainbow body when dying? No, yes. Blah, blah, blah. So, but in East Asian Buddhism, it becomes complex, because how do you know a Zen master is enlightenment or not? Especially when they introduce these notions that an enlightened being and a non-enlightened being, there's actually absolutely no difference between them. If you're not enlightened, carry water and chop wood. If you are enlightened, carry water and chop wood. And so it becomes difficult. It's like, how do you know? Like,
Yeah.
well, at least in Vajrayāna, I have a justification to say, oh yeah, my guru was totally enlightened. He achieved the rainbow body. Like, was you there? No, I wasn't there. There's a photo. Yeah, there's a photo. I can't actually see it because I'm not. I'm not. I don't have permission to see it. Well, how do you know? I just know. I have faith. I guess it's something like that with them. Maybe I don't really know. I'm not a East Asian Mahayana practitioner.
Sure. No. But I love the answer. It's like we have a very simple answer: has the teacher achieved rainbow body or not? But what about the debate schools? Because I think the debate schools have a more difficult time legitimizing this. Well, not from the side of the debate schools. Obviously, they would say it's easier for them to prove something. But how to say? I mean, the rainbow bodies, typical enigma. Occasionally, Kagyus. I think the 16th Karmapa, at least, was also sort of talking about these. Uh, but for example, let's look at the Ganden lineage and the Dalai Lama lineage that followed afterwards, and the Panchen Lama. They kind of go with the typical kind of sutra. Well, there's two responses. One of the Ganden responses would be like, yeah, well, you see, there's still the sutra leaning stories. Think about Avalokiteshvara, for example. Avalokiteshvara has the view, but he chooses rebirth to benefit all other sentient beings. Whether or not these sentient beings are illusory or mere appearances or whatever else, that's fine. Avalokiteshvara chooses rebirth, right, to benefit all sentient beings. And then if you look at Kedrub, one of the main disciples of Je Tsongkhapa, yeah, he was also later on recognized posthumously as the fourth Panchen Lama, right? But when we think about the Ganden founders, we see them as Buddhas, at least in the Ganden school, right? There's all sorts of interesting kind of Tibetan historicities hear about who really is the second Buddha, right? The Nyingma say that Guru Rinpoche is the second Buddha, and the Kagyus say that Karmapa, and so on and so forth, Sakya Pandita or Je Tsongkhapa or whatever else. But usually to Gandenpas, right? Kedrup is seen as a Buddha himself, kind of thing. But then he seeks rebirth out of compassion for all sentient beings, whether or not he was actually, the fourth Panchen Lama or not. I mean, maybe that's an interesting story for another time, but sometimes, I believe one time His Holiness said that, look, most sentient beings experience rebirth because of ignorance, but high Bhumi Bodhisattvas or already enlightened beings that kind of altruistically decide to come into the world and help the world, their rebirth conditions are not ignorance, but they're compassionate, right? So maybe that's one kind of thing that ambiguates, I think, this problem of how do we know who's enlightened and who's not. But I think the second question, the second response, which I don't know if I favor because I don't know too much about it, but it's kind of Je Rinpoche's view. Well, I mean, it's not only Je Rinpoche. There were debates with Gorampa also and plenty of other masters afterwards. But it seems that this Sakya Gelu kind of thread of debate and Pramana and whatever else, right? It's like they say that, look, well, such and such school actually, like, that's not Buddhahood, or that's not enlightenment, or that's not the view, or that view is not sufficient. And okay, very often this goes towards arhats, right? And people that are on the path of seeing. And they're kind of talking about, well, you see, well, this is technically not enlightenment, or this is misapprehension of emptiness, or they do all sorts of gymnastics and scriptural analyses to sort of evidentiate that such and such view is not the view, whether grounded in something or not grounded in something. Do you think this kind of complicates this process or not?
Well, from an inner perspective, if you are, if you're a Mahayana practitioner, someone asks you if Pratyeka Buddha is a fully enlightened Buddha, well, you will need to say, no, he isn't. If you're a Theravada, you will say, yes, he is. An Arhat, yes, he also is, But when you try to apply this to a more general or global kind of point of view, then all these sort of problems arise, because it becomes very complicated. Like, okay, who is enlightened, who isn't? The eternal debate, okay, an emanation of a bodhisattva or of a Buddha in human form. Okay, we know he's an emanation, but is he a sentient being? So if he's a sentient being, suddenly does he needs to actually become enlightened too, or not, or because he's an emanation of a Buddha or Bodhisattva? And if he is an emanation of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, is even the person a sentient being in itself, or is just an illusion? Like in one of the sutras of the Pure Land of Amitabha, it is said that there's beautiful birds that chant sutras and the name of the Buddhas and all that stuff. And it is said these birds are not real, they are not sentient beings. They are emanated by Amitabha Buddha to help practitioners in his Pure Land. So this kind of this kind of complicates things even more, because in the sutras they say, oh, if a Buddha or Bodhisattva emanates something, it's not really a sentient being. It is just illusory to help other beings. But then you are said, no, they are actually sentient beings, so which is it?
Yeah, yeah, good point. And the illustrative tool that I kind of see helpful is the idea that the same way we explain to children with cartoons and stuff, right? It's like, are cartoons sentient beings? Well, not really. Cartoons don't have mind streams. Cartoons don't undergo rebirth, but cartoons are animated, right? Think about it as a good response to the Atman view of Indian philosophy, kind of thing, right? It's like there's appearances of movements that are sensorially interacting, that uh, can give the impression of a real character. You can construct a fictive character and whatever else to illustrate something or to teach a lesson or whatever else. But that doesn't mean they're as real as we are, so to say. I mean, sure, there's maybe more ambitious philosophers that would say, no, we're also cartoons in a big simulation, big cosmic simulation or whatever else. But to kind of typical conventional thought, you wouldn't you say that these are kind of helpful constructions, so to say, between kind of the cartoons, fictive thought, and the Amitabha Buddha Sutras?
Uh, they could be. They could totally be. Or maybe they are both. You know, maybe Buddhas and Bodhisattvas can actually manifest sentient beings, not just illusions. I don't know. I mean, I just follow what the sutra says, but I never fully know anything.
I mean, yeah, but if you want to see it the other way, I mean, that kind of does complicate things, right? Because the Buddha is the father of all bodhisattvas, right? This kind of sounds like the typical story of God is the father of all the angels, right? It's like, yeah, it's especially in the Mahavirochana sutras and tantras. It's like, yeah, well, the Buddha is literally the father of all bodhisattvas.
Yeah, and basically we are all emanations of Mahavairokkana Buddha in those sutras and tantras, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But then every school has like their a small tale of how sentient beings came to be. For example, in Enigma, there's this tale that uh, there existed the mass of anything and everything and nothing at the same time, you know. But this was not like this was sentient. This had awareness, because if not, then there will be nothing. And then a rainbow passed alongside the way, and you know, a rainbow needs to be in time and space, because a rainbow starts in one place, ends in another, and when you go from one place to another, then there's time between going from one place to another. And so this weird mass of everything and nothing and emptiness, blah blah blah, it became aware of the rainbow, and it became aware of time and space. And and some parts of that mass, you know, they they became aware of that, but then they didn't become aware of the inherent emptiness of everything, including the rainbow and time and space and whatnot. So those became sentient beings, and that's what's actually happening right now when babies are born and all that stuff. So I think every school has their little tale to make sense of this kind of stuff, you know. But when you try to apply it to a greater Buddhist perspective, from the Theravada to the Mahayana to the Vajrayana and every single small sect that is in between, it becomes very, very weird and complicated.
yep, yeah, yeah. That's very true. Yeah, I mean that kind of goes well with the typical Enigma stories of we just need like Dzogpa Chenpo is more of the practice of re-recognizing or like recognizing again, right? Sometimes I've heard this notion of againness, right? So it's, I mean, I don't know how correct that is, but it's kind of re-recognizing or becoming aware once more of the the primordial purity of the Buddha mind.
Yeah,
And
it always implies that we were aware in one time, you know.
yeah, yeah, that's true. Which again kind of complicates things. It's like I'm pretty sure I would have known if I achieved liberation by now. I would have told my friends and everything. Yeah, but I don't know. When I hear these sort of like Buddhist sci-fi stories, I can't tell. I can't call them anything but that. But you know, I think of the Ganden pragmatism, because that's really what, you know, after some reading, it really seems to me. I mean, when Tsongkhapa was asked to perform miracles, he was just saying, no, not now, I'm busy studying and whatever else. And yeah, these sorts of, they kind of ground themselves more on negating the object of existence, meaning the, well, to some very vanilla, you know, very limited view, inherent inherent existence here, meaning, right, thinking that there's true existence of pen and that it wasn't somehow brought into appearance before the eye consciousness as product of causes and conditions, and not seeing this is already kind of uh, an obscuration for seeing reality as it is. And then by kind of removing these sorts of misconceptions and misapprehensions of the nature of the external world and the dynamic of subject and object, and eventually we see that nothing is inherently existence and that everything is empty of inherent existence, and that is the middle way, and whatever else. Yeah, I don't know much about kind of other schools giving these sorts of folky tale stories, but wouldn't you say that to some extent these sorts of pocket school kind of niches are more of a synthesis with the respective socio-historical conditions of the time, right? I mean, Japanese Buddhism picked up on Shintoism a little, and Chinese Buddhism kind of blended with Taoists and Confucianists and everything else. So isn't the easier explanation to just say, yeah, well, to kind of make sense in that particular culture, that's, yeah, people just saw it this way.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Buddhism as a doctrine in this world, you know, in this earth, it's not pure. Like, not even Theravada, you know. People like to say, oh, Theravada are the true words of the Buddha and it's the true doctrine of Buddhism. That's not really the case. Uh, it blended with a lot of stuff, with a lot of Hinduism. It blended with a lot of Southeast Asian folk religion and everything, and it developed in a way that makes it unique. And this happens with every Buddhist sect, every Buddhist school. Uh, Personally, I don't think that this kind of weird mixes and mismatches make this make these folk tales or explanations less valuable. You know, in the end, it's skillful means. If it helps to bring people to liberation, so be it. You know, it's okay by me. But yeah, it does complicate things quite a bit. Trying to understand it from a greater perspective, and then some crazy bastards introduce Western philosophy with Neoplatonism, the logos. It's the you know, it's the original awareness of emptiness, the world of ideas that Plato described, and oh, holy. And then I just get out of the conversation because I can't like keep on focus of all everything. But yeah, I think it happened, and of course, some of these tales and ideas they resonate with some people, and thus they adopt them, and they are useful. and they are useful, some not, and they are usually discarded. And yeah, this totally happens.
Yeah, I think that's a very good answer. The whole let's just leave them as manifestations of skillful bring closer to. That's a great. Uh, but wouldn't you say that people that do comparative philosophy try to do the same thing when they talk about Plato or whatever else, Howard and the Buddha and whatever else? Isn't this upaya for Westerners also?
Oh man, uh, I don't even know because I've seen people that conflate like Buddhist Madhyamaka with Neoplatonism, and then they add Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, and whatnot. So, oh, there's philosophers. They are crazy. That's why I'm not one. That's why I'm a tantric practitioner.
Yeah, yeah. But I think that's kind of the limit of these sort of upaya leaning stories, if you look at it that way, right? It's because if there is no monolithic view that can easily distinguish itself from non-Buddhist view, or if there's no kind of clear historical consistency, then it's very easy for people to say, well, how can I have conviction in the view if it's so scattered, if it's so ununiform, if it's so difficult to explain, if it's so difficult to enter, right? I mean, think about also Chandrakirti's writings and, loosely speaking, what it means to enter the Mahayana path. It's not easy. And if I think about most of, religious practices that I know of or that I've participated in, Mahayana and Vajrayana are very, very complicated and very, very demanding compared to most other practices. So it's really not an easy path, and it can definitely feel discouraging, especially if there seems to be so many layers of difficulties of entering, of understanding, of having a view, of finding a teacher and a community and whatever else. And on top of that, there's all these nuances of, okay, well, if the role of Dharma is to liberate all sentient beings and eventually, right, there's all sorts of notions of liberations about hearing, liberation about seeing. Interestingly, nobody talks about liberation upon smelling or something else. So, not like you can
Yeah,
smell.
I actually had a chat with a friend of mine because it is said that when a being hears the medicine Buddha mantra, even one time, he will never be reborn in the three lower realms again. So he said, well, this is easy. We put like very big speakers in a pickup, in the back of a pickup, and we go to the neighborhood blasting the medicine Buddha mantra, and voila, we are liberating beings instantly from the three lower realms.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know, I don't think it works that way, but but if you want to give it a try.
I mean, isn't that what the Abrahamic religions do when they put their uh, their kind of prayers on the megaphone and everything else? They can hear them from 20 kilometers away. I'm pretty sure it's the same view for them. It's if sentient beings even hear these prayers, they'll instantly go to heaven or whatever else, right? So that's kind of the difficulty of it. But I think the upside of this is more if you think of, there's all sorts of stories of people only hearing the name of a teacher or a deity or a scripture, and then they instantly generate bodhicitta and kind of feel some sort of special connection with that particular entity or whatever text or something, right? So I think that's the upside of it, is that there are people that kind of do it, but I think the interesting part is that for those kind of stories, people sort of it's kind of an inner transformation that comes from the inside of a particular sentient being, right? It, like do you kind of see the where I'm trying to go with this?
Yeah, of course. Like, there's this story of a Mahasiddha. I don't remember his exact name. That actually, after practicing Tantra a lot of years and saw no results, he threw his mala to a toilet, and then a Jidam appeared and blah blah blah. He became enlightened and all that stuff. And I'm pretty sure if I throw my mala in a toilet, I'm going to Vajra jail, to Vajra hell. I'm not going to get enlightened in any way or form. But that's the thing with this kind of tales. I think some of these happened. Yeah, I don't have any problem believing some of these happened, but they are an exception to the rule. Like maybe in the Far East we have the examples of a Zen master whacking his student with a piece of wood, and then the student became enlightened, and all sort of Zen koan poems. Um, and the thing is, even if that was literally happened, you can't just take it at face value and try to do it, like, because, well, in the tier 5 Buddha's confession, it says that all my defilements and negative karma and all that stuff, it's all gone. So if I practice the tier 5 Buddha prostration, does that mean I purified literally all the karma that I had in all my billions of previous lives and all that stuff? Maybe not, realistically not. uh, Even if I do it with the faith that I will and that the Buddhas will purify all that, probably not. But that's the thing, you can't take everything at face value.
Yeah, good. Yeah, this actually brings me to a question. I'm still trying to find a teacher to ask this question, but we have the typical stories in the biography of Shakyamuni, and then later on extended by Aryadeva also, where it's like, the Buddha cannot transfer his realizations to you. He cannot wash your sins with water, but the only thing he can do that's of utmost benefit is to teach, right? So when I think about Vajrasattva or the 35 Buddhas or whatever else, it's like, didn't just Aryadeva say, or Nagarjuna or whatever else, didn't they just say earlier, yeah, well, water doesn't purify anything. So then what is the actual kind of function of Vajrasattva and the other purification practices if it's not as easy to purify? I mean, why is how can the mantra or the prostration purify better than the water or those sorts of things?
Yeah, there's all sorts of explanation for these kind of things. Like, some gurus will say, oh, it's because you're actually purifying yourself, all that things, you're purifying all that defilement and negative karma by yourself, but you are using the Buddhas as a proxy uh, in your mental state. And some other gurus will say no, they literally just purify it by you because they are such good guys that want to help. uh, and again, in Vajrayana, if in Mahayana we have a lot of contradictory things, because one sutra says one thing, the other sutra says the other thing, etc. Oh, in Vajrayana it's hell because one guru says one thing and the other guru says literally the opposite, and all that stuff. Some gurus will say, oh, if you chant a mantra but you didn't have your mala in the left hand, and it was a mala made from body seeds, and the guru bead had like the three colors, white, red, and blue, then it didn't count at all, And some other gurus will say, just chant your mantra uh, in solitary, without the presence of someone, without Samaya bows, and it's all good. And some other crazy guru will say, no, you can chant your mantras without a mala and in front of anyone you want, and while you are in the bathroom, and I don't know, the multiplicity of views becomes extreme, from one guru to another, from one sect to another, from one school to another.
Yep. And I think that makes it difficult, particularly for Buddhists, to to navigate this, because every other religion has it so much easier. when it comes to differences. There's either a church or, I mean, there's more rigidity and the differences are clearer, right? And they're not so, I mean, the other religions, I feel like they have an easier time isolating themselves, even within schools and whatever else, right? Catholics from the Byzantines and whatever else. I mean, they both like to claim that, what you call it, the other school is wrong or whatever else. They don't have a problem calling that out. But in Buddhism, that makes it more difficult, right? Because of all these samayas of, not talking such and such about gurus or other sorts of nuances such as these. So then what?
Yeah, and it's crazy because, like, for example, a Theravada may not recognize you as a Buddhist if you are a Vajrayāna Buddhist. Most of them will, but there are some orthodox ones that will say, no, you're actually not a Buddhist because you're a Mahayana or Vajrayana practitioner. But then you, as a Vajrayana practitioner, you have samayas that you must never insult or badmouth a member of the Sangha, even if it is Theravada or Hinayana, and it becomes crazy, because some of them can accept everyone, but then you need to accept everyone without any hesitation at all. But yeah, I think this happens because the nature of Buddhism in itself, like, you don't really want to say, oh, that although this actually happens in text, they say, oh, I'm very grateful because I found the true, unique, undefiled Dharma, unlike those heretics from that other school that they have a fake Dharma, but don't tell them to their faces. And yeah, we have a difficult time with that. Maybe it will become more easy as, Mahayana and Vajrayana are more established in the West. Maybe I can't really tell. I don't see the future. But all this kind of stuff for, let's say, the Tibetans in the 14th century. Well, it was easy because you go to your guru, you pledge your body, speech, and mind to your guru. You follow everything that your guru says, and you don't really need to think about what the other guru is doing or what the Sakyas are doing or what the Gandhams are doing. But we live in the age of interconnection, public access, information. Like when I was talking with you, when I said, oh yeah, I was actually I took refuge with a Ganden guru, but I don't really consider myself a Ganden because all other teachings that I had were either like Nyingma or Kagyu. So what shall I be, And in ancient times it was more clear cut, but today it is more difficult to establish, and I guess what we call a religious identity, a religious identity for Buddhists.
Yep. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think the heydays of Dharma identity kind of went away after Jangon Kontrul in the 19th century. I think up until then people had it easier, right? There wasn't much technological access, there wasn't much interconnection. Yeah. As you were saying, you didn't have to worry about what the other people on the other side of the country are doing with their monasteries or their teachers or whatever else. But now it's kind of inevitable and whatever else. I mean, more or less, I'm in a similar position, but reverse, because my refuge master is Nigma master, but most of my teachings and whatever else, people that I've been exposed to are Ganden and some Kagyus also. So then, occasionally I also ask myself, well, what am I? What is really my affiliation in this sense? But I mean, I think it's worth considering the Rime movement. I mean, I don't know anybody that's anti-Rime in that sense, right? I mean,
Well, some sectarians are against the Rime movement.
I mean, but leaving that aside, like sticking to more mainstream views, like for example, uh, His Holiness Sakya Tenzin, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and uh, the Karmapa that's also recognized by His Holiness and whatever else. They all say, look, the Rim is because they've had instructions from all other schools, from all other teachers, right? So, I mean, even Karmapa, this was maybe it was the eighth or ninth Karmapa, if I'm not mistaken. He wrote an homage poem to Jetson Kappa saying something something, oh Lord of the land of snows, thanks for restoring Dharma and whatever else. So even back then there was some sort of recognition of the efforts of other schools. It wasn't always kind of overly competitive debate and orthodoxy and whatever else. There were also moments in Tibetan history where there was more harmony than dispute and whatever else. So yeah, that's the thing. I think insofar as we think of, FPMT and perhaps other sort of general organizations, they're quite rimepa in that sense, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, totally. The more mainstream organizations are totally for Rim, and I don't know. Maybe Rime in itself will become the future religious identity of Vajrayana practitioners. It's possible. I don't know if it will, but it's totally possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Go ahead.
other thing is that some people will argue that, oh, why are you thinking about this? Because a religious identity is not necessary. But I think it is. I think it is because uh, a religious identity is not just saying, oh, I am from this sect or I am from this school. It's a lot more like that than that. It is a sense of unity with a sangha. It is a sense of unity with something greater than you, with a lineage and all that stuff. And I think it is positive. It is greatly positive as long as it doesn't become like extremely sectarian.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you. Because I mean, think about the broad Mahayana message that we're all one human family, or compassion for all sentient beings and whatever else, right? I mean, there's all sorts. I'm pretty sure I've heard teachers from all schools say that we need to abandon these mentalities of me or my country, my religion, my school, these sorts of things, because they are subtle forms of self-grasping ignorance, right? And the whole point of the Mahayana path is to overcome self-grasping ignorance. So insofar as we're trying to do this, then we shouldn't perhaps hold attachments, perhaps in that sense. I don't know. I think this is a difficult debate, right? I mean, think about, sometimes people say, well, that was the beauty of Chandrakirti's supplication, because most people supplicate to schools or their gurus or the lineage holders or what have you. But Chandrakirti praised compassion, right? Chandrakirti praised the compassion at the middle, at the beginning, at the middle, at the end, the all-pervasive compassion that is accessible to all sentient beings. So in that sense, maybe that is a good way to look at it. But the difficulty is we have no guarantee that other people are going to share the sort of sympathy for others, and at least in this context, maybe, who knows.
Yeah, and it's actually like present in Buddhist canon and in Buddhist scripture, from the Pali to the Mahayana. We have the notion of a Dharma nation. We have the notions of Dharma kings. We have the notion of Dharmic people, and we have this notion of the wheel turning monarch. I sometimes like to joke that in that regard, Buddhism it's actually very imperialistic or monarchic. They are always talking about kings and the ideal king, the perfect form of a king, is the will-turning monarch, or the noble will-turning monarch. In that regard, but going back to what you said, I actually like to see it as a practitioner, personally, in terms of relative and ultimate. Ultimately, there is no separation between you and me, even though you are from Eastern Europe and I am from Central America or North America. I think Mexico is considered North America. But okay, there's no separation in a ultimate level, because both you and I and our countries and the actual soil or land, blah blah blah, it's empty in its inherent nature. But in the relative level, and that is the worldly level, the samsaric level, if you will, I can't just say we are the same, because I can't know what you are thinking. You can't know what I'm doing right now. Like, uh, there is some sort of separation that will exist as long as I am a samsaric being. So I can't just say, oh yeah, I'm open to everything, I'm open to everyone. And of course, you can't be open to people that have anti-dharmic conducts, because that's not, I will say, that's not really good, neither for you, neither for other practitioners, neither for the Dharma itself.
Yeah, that's correct. Even from the Pali Canon, we see traces of what you're saying with promoting Dharma and kind of rejecting adharma, right? Conduct that is not dharmic in nature. And there's enough explanations for us to kind of have at least some fundamental ideas of that. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see where this goes. I mean, yeah, I'm not. Oh yeah. The one thing that I did want to stress about Buddhism and the turning of the wheels and monarchs and whatever else, it's like, okay, I think there is a big conflation. I'm not sure if this is a translation problem from Asian languages into English, or if it's also present in uh, Asian languages. But Dharma King, it's like Dharma Raja in Sanskrit, so it's not really. Oh, which is also your Skype name, yeah. So right, it's like that's kind of the
Dharma Raja,
yeah.
because that's actually my refuge name. It's my refuge name, but in Sanskrit.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. So that's the thing. I think I'll just leave it to the English language because I'm not a philologist. So, but in the English language, I think it's such an important nuance to make a difference between Dharma King and King of Dharma, right? Dharma kings are entities with political authority that can implement Buddhist policies, right? Like Ashoka, like Tritson Dretsen, Genghis Khan, Tokugawa shogunates, right? Thai monarchs, Bhutanese monarchs, blah blah, right? That's one thing. King of Dharma is a sentient being that is enlightened. It's 10th Bhumi, 11th ground, or Parinirvana, or whatever else. It's, folks like Guru Rinpoche and Lama Tsongkhapa and Sakya Pandita and Kedrubje and whatever else. These sorts of entities, right? These sorts of entities didn't really have temporal power per se. Okay, leaving the fifth Dalai Lama aside because, yeah, he did both. But I'm saying like think about the Tibetan masters before the fifth Dalai Lama, so to speak, right? Like there was a clear distinction between monarchs that had policy authority and monks or extraordinarily realized yogis that were so accomplished that we can call them enlightened or near enlightenment, or they're venerable or revered or whatever else, right? Do you think this is an important difference that we should be making?
Oh, of course, and in the English language and other languages, this distinction needs to be emphasized, because I can totally see people like confusing Dharma king with king of Dharma, and then 1,000 years later, he's a king and he follows Dharma, so he's a king of Dharma, and so he's an enlightened being and things like that. It can happen. We never know.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. But I think this distinction has to be kind of preserved even more, especially now since, the kind of nuances. I mean, because of the secular kind of views in most countries, and there's once again a strict separation between the religious activities and the political activities. So I think it would be again valuable to sort of emphasize this distinction. I think this is one of, to kind of go back in a circle to sutras about Marx and whatever else. And I'm sure it's not only restricted to that, right? There's other texts also that talk about kings of Dharma and Dharma kings and ideal kingdoms and whatnot. But yeah, that's the thing, right? It's we need to understand this kind of subtle nuance, because they have different, these entities they have different promises to uphold, right? And they have different kind of commitments in the mundane world and whatever else. And yeah, we should see them perhaps maybe better off as separate in that extent. I mean, sure, there are, historically speaking, people that did both, or that the social kind of conditions were laid out for them to do both. But at least as far as we understand kind of political authority and sort of dharma authority, maybe it's better to leave them separate, right?
Yeah, totally.
And this is the extra advantage of Buddhist secularism, right? Where it's like it's primarily atheistic in the first place, more or less. So there isn't any worry about theocracies or whatever else. I think this is another criticism towards, right, early Buddhist studies, when people would call some Mahayana states theocracies kind of pointlessly, if you would say, right? It's like there's not much yeah, theocratic about them, really, in the sense of that we would kind of categorize Western civilizations as theocratic.
Yeah, of course. And then you have, I mean, this is still happening, just because a president is a Christian, let's say, in a Western nation, doesn't automatically mean it's a Christian nation. And just because in the ancient world there was a Buddhist king or a king that followed the Dharma, it doesn't really mean that it was a Buddhist nation. Most of the time, it really wasn't. Like, I know the example of Kanishka from the Koshan Empire. Like, in scriptures, he converted to Buddhism. We have some physical archaeological evidence that he actually did that. So I think we can confidently say he was a Buddhist emperor, but his empire, actually, most of the subjects were probably Zoroastrian. So yeah, it's like most quote unquote Buddhist kings or Dharma kings have act like just secular monarchs or secular rulers, with Buddhism always like in a second plane.
Yeah.
Maybe an argument could be made for Ashoka, but then again, it is said that he executed like a ton of Jains because they did a heresy or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very difficult to really kind of understand that one. Anything else you'd like to add, or any subject you'd like to kind of bring about?
Not really. Like, we could talk about a lot of subjects, but it will need like another episode, I think, because
Yeah.
the, Dharma and politics, it's very extensive subject, both in ancient times and in current times. and things like that. So maybe not today.
Yeah. I think for the next talk, I think we should choose like a particular era, be it ancient or contemporary, and then see where it goes from there. Okay. Yeah. Let's call it. Let's wrap it up for now. And thanks again for joining. It was super fun to talk to you, and I hope to see you again at some point. Again. Yeah.
Thanks to you. It was my pleasure, and I'm very happy to be here.
All right. Awesome. Take care. Bye.